Well, good afternoon and welcome to a special edition of MEED Live, produced in partnership with Cigna Insurance Management Services. My name is Richard Thompson. I will be your host for today. And over the next hour, we will examine the future of the workplace and how changing expectations from both employers and employees are moving the dial in terms of how we live and work. Over the past 20 months or so throughout the pandemic, we've seen radical changes in the way that we live and the way that we work. And that has involved things like working from home, hybrid working models, video conferencing, social distancing measures in the office, and webinars such as this, and a whole host of new things, or at least things that were not so common before the pandemic. All of these have been sort of normalized by the requirements of the pandemic. But in actual fact, what we've really seen is an acceleration of changes that were already underway, both in terms of expectations and in terms of using new technology. So what we're going to do over the next hour, we're going to look at what the impact of the pandemic and the past 20 months has been on the workplace and what it means for employees and employers in the future. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a wonderful panel of experts to discuss these issues. So I have with me today David McKenzie, who is the Group Managing Director of Mackenzie Jones. I have Ian Giulianotti, who is the Executive Director of Nadia Global, and Jerome Drosch, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Cigna, Middle East and Africa and Southeast Asia, and who is also our host for today. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much. This is a great opportunity to sort of speculate and to understand and gain some insights on the future of work and what we can expect and how we can prepare, what strategies we can employ and prepare to cope with the changes that are likely to come down the line. So you can send your questions and any comments you have using the comments tab on the right-hand side of your screen. And at the bottom of the comments tab, you'll see there's a little text field. If you send your questions in or comments in for the panelists, I will try and field them as best as possible. And hopefully we can leave the session today with lots of fresh insights and understandings. So thank you for being with us. Let's get on with the show. David McKenzie, I'd like to come to you first. Just sort of in the round, how is the workplace changing and what are your views on the future of work?
I think it's fundamental, actually. I think we're in a situation now which is fairly unprecedented, where the sort of work balance is shifting hugely. I mean, we talk about working from home, hybrid working. Boris in the UK is trying to force people to go back to offices because Presse-à-Manger needs customers. I think there's a really interesting dilemma going on in the world of work at the moment. I think also there's sort of three parts of it. One is, I think hybrid working is here to stay. Whichever way we look at this, it's going to stay. I think the innovation collaboration needs people in the office. I think people need to be there to engage with each other. I also think that employee welfare is going to play a much bigger part for companies' recruitment strategies. So if you are a company that shows that you look after employees and you want to work with them and engage with them and give them flexibility, then I think you're going to become an employer of choice. So I think in summary, I think that the world of work has changed dramatically. I mean, you can see me, I was sitting in my study working from home today. I would never have done that 5 years ago. And I think it's a good thing, but we just need to make sure we manage it properly and we need to see what the productivity levels will be like.
I'm very curious that you mentioned just now about being the employer of choice. So how important do you think that is from a corporate point of view to take on board what your future and current employees expect? Is that kind of being an employer of choice, is that one of the key driving factors for how companies will respond?
Oh, I think so. I think that this war for talent's been going on for decades, and I think now the ownership is very much on the candidate side. The clients have to attract good talent, and people aren't asking about what pension they get, where the office is located. They're asking, what flexibility do I have? If how many days can I work from home, and do you provide days when I can just take time off for mental well-being? And I think these are really interesting things coming up now, and we've had a couple of very interesting questions where candidates have been offered jobs, and the first question that the candidate's has asked the employer is, how often do I need to be in the office? You would never have thought that a few years ago. So I do think now candidates definitely have the upper hand, and they're the ones that can control to a degree what the workplace will look like in the future. And I don't think it's going to be people sitting in offices 9 to 5 anymore.
And what is your sense of why people want that? Is it because of the cost of travel and commuting, or even the time cost, if not just the financial cost? Or is it they want peace and quiet to focus? Is it people are becoming more antisocial? Why are people asking those questions?
Or it's the Netflix culture? I'm not sure. I think there are three things. If you're in Europe, let's face it, I used to live in Oxford and I used to commute into London every day, 2 hours there and 2 hours back, just physically tired, never saw my family. So I think that's one part. The other bit is cost. I think, commuting into cities now, metropolitan areas, is very expensive. And I think the third one is people are more productive sometimes when they're at home, because they can start slightly later, get a very productive day, and then they can have a bit of what we call me time, family time. And I think that's a key thing.
And just before I move on to Ian, we've talked about it from the employee or prospective employee point of view. What about from the employer point of view? There are mixed messages to me from what the employers want. That for years we've been, there's been talk about flexible working, less cluttered office spaces and things like that. But I get the sense that actually, certainly big corporates are not so keen now to have completely hybrid working models, because maybe there's a lack of trust or something.
Well, and this is the issue I think we face, is that the employees still have to earn the trust of the company and vice versa. But I think until you let people do things, you never know whether they're going to be brilliant or bad at it. So I think employers need to make that shift, because employees have already made that shift. So if you're one of the ones that's saying you have to be in work 9 to 5, then often candidates will walk and go somewhere else on that basis, unfortunately. And I think, job for life is no longer here. The average tenure of an employee in the UAE is about 18 months to 2 years, if that. In Europe, it's probably 3 to 4 years. So that, when people aren't at companies 10, 11 years anymore, unfortunately.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. If any of you have questions for David on any of the points that he has raised, or indeed any of the other panelists, please use the comments tab that's on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can send in your questions. I'd like to bring in now Ian Giulianotti, who is the Executive Director for Nadia Global. Ian, thank you for joining us today. Just following on from David's comments, are you seeing the same things? And particularly, is it the same in the Middle East?
Well, let me say, first of all, I've been privileged to live in Dubai since the 1970s. And what I've seen in the last 2 years has dramatically changed the workplace. Dramatically changed the workplace. I think it's best summed up by saying that COVID-19 has made the future the present. Things that if you'd asked me pre-COVID, automation, artificial intelligence, hybrid working, working from home, all these things, if you'd asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said it's going to take 7 to 10 years before that becomes the norm in the Middle East. It's actually the norm now.
And is it your sense that it's the norm now because we've been through this kind of artificial period forced upon us by the pandemic, or is it now the norm permanently? Have we seen a structural change in expectations?
Well, it's been forced upon us, but we've had to live with the realities. And of course, we're still not out of the pandemic yet. We are returning to normal, but we're still not out of the pandemic yet. And so I think some of our customers, we're seeing some of our clients are back to full office work. while other clients are still working on a hybrid model, 1, 2, 3 days a week for the employees to be in the office. The crunch is going to come. I think there are two things here, and I'm sure David will agree with me on this. It's a shrinking pool, but there's still a large pool of unemployed people looking for jobs. And so, although the employee may have the upper hand in certain circumstances, the employer as well still has the rules to say, we want you into work. And as long as we've got this pool of unemployed people, it will continue like that. Once we get to the situation where there is a shortage of talent in the market, then it's going to change a little bit as well, and people are going to be more demanding.
And is it your sense that David has described the dynamics in a sort of global sense, and he referred to the European market, the UK market, etc. You've been talking about the Middle East, and so I infer from what you've said that there are the dynamics in each country or each market can be quite different depending on where that market is in terms of employment levels or even employment regulations.
Yeah, again, I think you need to remember that in the Middle East, 85-90% of the working population are expatriates. They're not permanent residents. Okay, in the UAE, we're now seeing golden visas, retirement visas, investor visas, etc., but there's still not that sense of permanency. You can own a home here, and you can get a visa owning that home, but that visa is only for 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's a different dynamic from Europe and America and the Far East. We've got what I prefer to call impacts. We've got more and more people. I mean, certainly if you look at if you look on the internet, say on Facebook pages, the amount of people that from Europe that want to come to the UAE now, constantly we're getting requests, we're looking for a job in the UAE, can you help us? Registration-wise, out of the 3,000 registrations, and this is not applications, but this is people registering with Nadia on a daily basis, submitting their CVs, out of those 3,000, at least 750 to 1,000 are people from all over the world. I mean, we even had one last month from somebody in the Friendship Islands, which I had to look up, and it's somewhere in the middle of the Pacific.
And just so that's quite interesting. So David's point was that prospective employees are making these new demands or requests about working conditions. It sounds like you're not getting the same questions that the people that you're dealing with are looking for.
Well,
jobs.
Again, there are two types of candidates. There are active candidates and inactive candidates. And what David was referring to is inactive candidates. In other words, people that have a job already, they're employed. It's the active candidates, the people who don't have a job, they're unemployed, or maybe they haven't been paid for a few months, etc., etc. Those are the ones that don't have the same negotiating platform as the ones David talks about.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ian. Now, for anyone who wants to follow up on any of the points that David and Ian have made so far, please use the comments bar on the right-hand side to get your questions in. I'll come back to you guys later through the discussion. Perhaps we can start to talk about things like strategic responses by companies and how people, employers and employees might change their practices in response to this. But I'd like to bring in Jerome Drosch now, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Cigna. Welcome, Jerome. You are our host today. Thank you for making this event happen. It's a very important topic, and I'm delighted to be part of it. Perhaps following on from David and Ian, I know that Cigna does a lot of research in sort of the area of the workplace and expectations. What are your observations and insights on how the workplace is changing.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And first of all, thanks for providing this platform that brings together many professionals from many angles and give us the opportunity to really discuss these important topics on the future of work that is, I think, top of mind for anyone in the market today. And maybe just another point I wanted to react on what Ain said about obviously the pandemic. So definitely the pandemic is not completely over, but I guess the region has really managed it extremely well, and that has provided us capacity to recover quite quickly. So when I discuss now with all CEOs in the market, for everyone's heads, it's more about how can I accelerate my journey, how I can grow faster, and for sure to achieve those goals, you need an empowered team, motivated and talented teams. You need both to attract and retain talent. So obviously it has created many debates, as highlighted by David and Ain and yourself. And I guess, all the research around the post-pandemic world are extremely critical for us to understand what is the expectation from our team members, whether it is about work-life balance, stress, health, well-being, all those kind of topics or hybrid work models. So we did our own research, and I wanted to share with you some of the main highlights that we got from the research. And first, I would suggest we go through some of the gaps that we find in the research. The first, and for me probably the most striking one, as mentioned to some extent, is the fact that 50% of the workers today want to change their job. That's a critical indicator, and it indicates that the workplace wellness is definitely on the decline in the region. And when we go deeper, actually half of those 50% are, I would say, likely to change, but half of them are very likely to change. So it's a very important indicator, showing that the stability of the job market is definitely completely different from what we've seen in the past years. And I think the economic recovery is driving this change. So that's the first major gap that we saw in the studies. The second one, I think, is another interesting one, is the fact that for 1 out of the 3 employees, they felt that they don't have the real understanding from their employer regarding their needs and what they expect in the workplace. And the third one is also around 1 out of 3 employees expecting more support in terms of mental health and accessing to that kind of support. And that's probably a very important gaps as well. So that's the first type of things I wanted to highlight in terms of gaps. The second type of insight for me is about the changing working model, as explained already by David as well. And in my view, there is an increasing appetite for among the employees to work from home. When you look at our data from the study, 41% of the employees today who are office-based in the UAE wants to work fully from home. That's completely different from what we've seen in the region in the past, because the region was probably even lagging behind compared to other markets like Europe, US, or others. And now it has completely shifted towards a very hybrid model. So this is, on one side, 41% wants a full-time work from home. Around 16% wants to really work hybrid. I know some of us in the panel are actually applying this new way of working, partially working from home, partially working from the office. I'm in the office today, but I was working from home yesterday, for instance. So something quite different. So 16% of the population like that kind of new model. And then 43% wants to work fully from the office. So that's another important population. So as you can see, it's very much split between three different categories of people with different expectation and different way of working moving forward. So I think for us as leaders, it's really interesting to reflect on those new trends, gaps as well, in order to provide the best strategies and solution for our team members. Okay,
thank you, Jerome. There's a lot of content to pick through there. On you split your comments into 2 sort of areas. One was the gaps between employers and employees, and the other was on changing expectations. On the gaps, your second point, if I understood you correctly, you were saying that employees were failing to understand the expectation of employers. Is that correct? And what does that mean? What expectations don't they understand?
So in fact, it was more the opposite. So employers are not understanding the expectation of their employees.
Oh, it's the other way around. Sorry, I misheard. Okay.
No worries. And I think that's a very important topic. I guess when people are looking for employment today, whether they're already employed or looking for a new role or a new job, they are looking at a more holistic approach, not only the type of role, not only, let's say, the compensation, but more globally, what does the employers provide to the employee? And it's a global combination of elements. It could be both, as we all understand now, the important access to care. So in the UAE, as we know, it's mandatory to provide healthcare cover. So that's an important factor for anyone to understand what would be my access to care if I join this company. That's one element, for instance. All around flexible way of working, hybrid model, all those kind of topics are becoming mission critical for employers to deliver. If they don't do that, I think it just provides a different feeling to the future candidates about how do you take care of your team members. And based on that, I think the reaction of employees might be very different, but also the reaction of candidates, especially the young generation, who have probably quite a couple of opportunities today in view of the economic recovery. So they will choose, as mentioned by David, the best in class, rather than the one who are lagging behind of taking care of their employees and team members.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the generational differences. I wanted to ask you on the second group of points that you made about changing expectations, and you said that about 41% wanted to work from home full time, and about 43% wanted to be in the office. You know, there was. Does that break down clearly amongst different age groups?
I think, it's probably all age group have, the same kind of willingness today to find a hybrid model. And again, as expected, and as we've just demonstrated today on the panel, even us as leaders, and probably above, for some of them, myself at least, being above 50 years old already, we still enjoy that kind of flexibility of way of working. But it's the same around the young generation at the same time. So what I do see as a change across the board, we also see it by gender. So we see a lot of appetite for female as well, because for them, flexibility of way of working is even more important, very often taking care of the child at home as well. So we do see a lot of expectation from all age band, all community, all genders. I think that's really across the board today. It's for me a real shift. What is very interesting as well, I was sharing with some colleagues in other geographies this morning, and we have the same feeling that today, even if we implement hybrid way of working today in the UAE, many people are struggling to go back to the office. And some of them are to some extent resisting to go back to the office on a regular basis, and they prefer that kind of hybrid model. So it's very interesting to see that this is something we observe not only in the region, but also worldwide in other geographies.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I want to come back to David briefly. We've had a question submitted by Jagjit, and I thought this would be one for you, David. So what kinds of supervision have you seen from employers in managing the hybrid working model? And I guess the key question here is, how does that change? And, that goes to the point about trust, I guess, as well.
I think they're struggling with it, actually. I think people are trying to figure out how to actually engage with their employees and give them the flexibility, but also want to know that they're actually working. So there are various methods. One is that you completely trust your employee. They go off and do their thing. And if they provide the end results at the end of the month or whatever, or the report, then you let them carry on doing it. I don't think that's the reality. I think what employers are trying to do is they're putting in software into place so that people can actually work from home properly, and you can measure some of that work activity. I think people need to be measured a lot more on things like KPIs. So if you're writing a proposal or you're doing a project and in the office it would be finished in 3 weeks, then the same expectations should be done from home. In theory, people are finishing work quicker from home because you don't have to travel. You've got a much more focused amount of time. The biggest issue is that people tend to work longer from home. So we've seen a real swing where people like working from home, but they end up working, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening when, in theory, they should have been going home. So I think there is a real struggle at the moment to try and figure out what is the most effective way of measuring people working from home And also, how does that compare to people working from the office?
We've had a follow-up question from Ram, which I think relates to the point you were just making. It says, how do you ensure productivity, which we have seen dropping by about 30% in our experience? Now, I'm interested in that second part of that sentence, the kind of 30% concern.
Yeah, I think
you've just described that people working apparently longer hours from home. I suspect that can't just be about presenteeism when you're working from home. That must be productive time.
Well, if not, they're out walking the dog, aren't they? So the reality is, I think what you've seen is we've taken a traditional workforce in the last 18 months and told it to go and work from home. Now, a lot of people don't like working from home. They want to be in the office, and they get motivated by people around them. They share ideas. They feed off other people's energy. So what you'll see happening in the next probably 18 to 20 months is that the workforce in some companies will shift completely. You'll have a different type of person that is able to adapt to what that company wants them to do, which could be a hybrid model. It could be a completely working from home. I'll give you a good example. A friend of mine works for Google in the UK. He's been working from home now for 2 and a bit years. He's looking for a new job. Obviously, I've just outed him, but the reality is he wants to get a new job because he misses the work environment. He misses the collaboration, the enjoyment of working with other people. And so I think we're going to see, certainly in the Middle East, a real shift in the type of people doing certain jobs, because I suspect the productivity will decrease until we figure out what model we need to use to get productivity back to where it was.
And I wonder if I can bring Ian in on that point. So, Ian, you talked about people from outside the region looking to find roles in the region. Is there a pattern? Are things changing in the type of candidates who want to come here and in the type of jobs they're looking for? I mean, you don't think of the Middle East as being an IT hub, and everyone wants to be in IT. How is that changing?
Well, strangely, I think you will see a big change in terms of the industries that are in the Middle East. And I believe a lot of the IT sector will move here from India. The infrastructure is being put in place, but the beauty
why do you think, when you say the IT sector, do you mean companies or individuals?
Individuals. Right. And I think the beauty of what's going to happen as well is that we're not just going to get people from the subcontinent in IT. We're going to get people from the Middle East. We're going to get people from the States who are going to turn around and say, hey, UAE is a place to be.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just make one other comment about
absolutely
working from home as well? I think the other difference we're going to have to see is the skill set that managers will need to have to manage people working remotely. And they're going to become much, much more coaches rather than managers.
That's very interesting. That sort of gets me onto, I wanted to get into the sort of strategic elements of the future of work. And so if I am a company, I need to now look at the skill set of my managers. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, indeed. And managers, it's going to become much, much more about not managing your team, but getting the best performance from your team and utilizing those people in the best way possible, so that you're looking at value. What is the value of a person's contribution to the company, rather than what skill set do they have?
So what, if I can sort of push you on this point a little bit, what does that mean? If I am a company and I want to hire some new managers, what should I be looking for in their repertoire that was different, to reflect this new requirement compared to what I might have looked for 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I think we could take the next 3 days talking about that. I mean, in general, you're going to have to, first thing is, they're going to have to be able to improve the skills of the people. Yeah. The second thing is, they're going to have a a combination when you're working with people that are working remotely, engagement, making sure that they feel recognized, to making sure that they feel worthy, lots of one-on-one communication, lots of micromanaging, rather than just having people on a computer IT and we know when they've logged in, we know when they've logged out. It's going to be much, much more a case of, okay, what are you doing? What's the progress? How far along are you with? Can I suggest that you do this or you change your focus to that? It's going to be like a football manager, looking at the team that you have and the skills that they have and putting them in the right positions. And then once the game started, making sure that they're all following the instructions, that they're all in position, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, if anyone wants to follow up on those points from Ian, I think that's a very important topic. Please use the comment box on the right-hand side. You can post a comment and put your question to Ian or to Jerome and David. We've got loads of questions coming in. I'm going to go through some of them now. So, Jerome, we have a question here from Prabal. What is your take on why 50% of expats in the UAE want to change their job? What's the takeaway from this insight? And does this say something about the reality of the working environment in the UAE?
Yeah, great question. And maybe just before I answer this question, I wanted to react on the productivity and efficiency. Just to highlight the fact that we had we've made some pulse survey along 2020, looking at what is the interest of anyone, exercising his job working from home. And initially, people were very excited about working from home, and they find it very interesting, finding flexibility in terms of way of working, and at the same time, keeping the same level of interest for their role. And what we saw is a progressive decline after a couple of months, because people felt that obviously you have much less diversity in the way you exercise your role. When you go to the office, sometimes you have a meeting, sometimes a physical one, sometimes a webinar. As mentioned, you get the energy from your other colleagues and team members. You are in the same room. When you work from home, you have much less diversity. So we've seen this kind of decline, obviously, along the way. So it's definitely a challenge that we need to take on board and see how we can, as mentioned by Ayn, manage differently our team members to get the same type of value creation in the long run. Going back to the question around, this very important, obviously, gaps around 50% being willing to change and to move to a new role. First, we try to understand what are the key explanation and the key factors generating that kind of situation, just to understand what we can work on. And there are a couple of factors. One of them is obviously the stress that is related to work. That's an important factor. And I think everybody acknowledged, and we've made a lot of studies around those topics, and we see even the medical consequence of that on the physical bodies as a health service provider. We've seen the stress level constantly evolving upwards during the pandemic level. Now it's getting slightly better. And the reason was twofold. Obviously, you had the stress related to work, but on top of that, you also had the stress of being infected. That is actually now going down because people are less worried about it. But we shouldn't forget that 1 year ago, if we just think our own behaviors, the main topics for all of us was to protect ourselves and protect our family members. So, that was creating a massive level of stress. Whenever we are going out, going to the office, people were stressed about it as well. So first key element is stress level. The second element is obviously, I think we've seen a real shift towards technology. We are all technology driven. And what's happening there as well is what we call the always on culture, where we are connecting from early morning towards the moment where we are sleeping. So that is creating another level of stress, and people feel that as employees, they have to react immediately for any request at any point in time. And I think, as mentioned by David, it leads to very long working hours. So it does generate a lot of stress and to some extent discomfort. So for instance, what we did at Cigna every single weekend, before the weekend, we are having a town hall with all our team members and trying really to reminding them that they need to unwind, they need to take some time for their family and to switch off, because otherwise you just constantly add pressure and level of stress. I think the other one that is We talked about productivity, but as always, we can look at it from two different lenses, the employee one and the employee one. So from an employer perspective, we are looking at it from productivity perspective, but from the employee lenses, they are looking at the overload and excess of activities that they have to manage on a daily basis. That is also true because to some extent, I think many companies had to go through the pandemic, both delivering what they do on a usual basis, but at the same time transforming themselves at the same time. So that was creating some extra layer of activities and extra pressure on the team members. And last, as I mentioned, is the lack of mental health support, resilience training program, all that kind of topics, meaning that some of the people felt that not only they were working from home, but they were not feeling that they are in a safe environment. They were just producing what they have to produce in their role, but being to some extent alone, facing those challenges altogether. So a lot of elements that are explaining the willingness to change and find a new type of role where companies are caring for their team members. And I think we need to reflect on each one of those explanations and try to understand how we can overcome those challenges.
I just wondered, Jerome, you touched on health cover provided by employee health cover provided by companies. I know that a lot of companies, with the business uncertainty that's been out there, now we have, talk about inflation and disrupted supply chains and things like that. So a lot of companies are reining in their costs, their spending, especially on things like travel and business travel when you can do, work calls online. Are you seeing companies downgrading their insurance cover or their healthcare plans, or because of these new factors that you talked about, the stress levels increasing and the mental health issues, are we seeing increased spending on health cover? What's your perception of how companies are changing?
So it's a very mixed picture, actually. So first, if we look at it from an employee perspective, 58% of the employee believe that they would like to have a better health cover. So I think that's a first element we need to think about. The other angle, we've made some studies around what's the perception of CEOs and leaders around what they need to provide and what is mission critical for them. And it's very interesting because 50% of the CEOs today in the market believe that it's mission critical for them to provide the right access to care to their team members and their dependents. Before the pandemic, it was only 20%. So as you can see, a massive lift and a massive improvement in the way, top leaders are looking at the importance of providing the right proposal. Now, when it comes to medical inflation, when you look at the medical inflation across the world, it's still quite high and it will continue probably because on one hand, I think we see a lot of great development, new technology, new treatment that will enable us to live probably a better life for a longer period of life as well. At the same time, we have to bear the cost of those access to care. So we do see two different types of companies. Some of them are absolutely not downgrading their cover because they believe it's mission critical and they can afford it, let's be honest. Some others are trying to find more value for money proposition. So for instance, we as Cigna were very much a high-end provider. We've designed a full new range of what we call mid-tier products that are more affordable for companies who are looking for great solution, great access to care, great expertise in healthcare, but at a much more affordable prices as well. So we can design different offer. And I think that's also our duty as health service companies to be able to provide affordable access to care for a wider audience as well.
If I can just come to David on this point. So David at the beginning said that prospective employees were asking questions about, work-life balance, working from home, hybrid working. Does health cover come into those list of questions that people are asking?
Yeah, I think they do, but I don't think so much is what we term as traditional healthcare about, which hospitals will take our card. It's more about, I think, and this is what Cigna definitely is doing a lot more of, which is it's about the mental health side of things. It's everything from, getting people to see therapists. It could be anything to do with alternative medicines. It's everything that probably traditional healthcare companies ignored to begin with. And I think now people are suffering a lot of work stress. And by the way, that's not actually being at work. Often it's being at home and isolated from your work colleagues. I don't know if you've seen recently in the British press, there's been a huge survey into university students that have been suffering from mental breakdowns because they've not been able to go and see their colleagues and their other students. I think we're going to find this with people generally in the world where they are stuck at home all the time. And I use the word stuck at home. Some people love it. Introverts love it. I'm not an introvert and I don't like being stuck at home. I sort of thrive in the work environment. But I think if you look at things like the healthcare companies now, and I know Jerome talked about this earlier, was they're being a lot more nimble about addressing the needs of employees now that previously was never considered.
I guess on your point there, just because somebody likes something doesn't mean it's good for them.
Very true. Yeah, I like exercise. I'm not sure it's very good for me all the time.
David, whilst I've got you on then, so Jagjid, who asked the question earlier, was it about productivity? I can't remember. Has asked a follow-up question, which is about. Jagjid asked the question about supervision, and the follow-up question is there any specific software that you have seen employers using for supervision? I don't know if this is an area that you cover.
I don't, but I have seen a number of companies use software that tracks everything from, when you log into your system, when you submit project information. We have a system that we use in recruitment that is a standard. It's called Vincere. And it basically, as soon as you log on, you can see all the stats, you can see all the information, and it shares it with your employer, which is good because it means there's a two-way focus on what's going on. So what I don't believe in, and this is a fundamental thing, is you have to sort of trust employees to begin with before you start slamming them with loads of surveillance software on keystrokes and, when you log in and when you log off, because then I think you're destroying the trust you're building up by letting them work from home. So I think we're learning how to do this properly, and there's going to be a lot of errors on our, employer's side and also on the employee side that don't get it right. That some people think that working from home means you can sack it off at midday and go and watch Squid Games. And honestly, that's not the way to further your career or engender yourself to your employer.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've got a lot of questions coming in. We have 20 minutes. 17 minutes remaining. Keep your questions coming. If I can just ask the panelists then, we want to try and race through as many questions as possible. So try and, I hope this doesn't sound rude, try and keep your answers as short as you can, just so we can get through as many of these questions. Now, Ian, a question here. Ian, I agree with you. How have you seen employers take a different approach in regards to the integration of new joiners?
A funny statistic is that 20% of what a new joiner learns is by imitation. And the biggest problem with remote working is they do not get that opportunity to join with other members of staff, to watch what other members of staff are doing. And so one of the keys for new joiners will be, how do we integrate people in? On a remote basis, how do we introduce them to people? That personal contact rather than sitting looking at a screen. And that's going to be a major challenge for companies with new joiners.
Okay. I think that sounds like, if we were sort of to put a list of strategic takeaways from this conversation, that sounds like it should be quite high up on that list. Now, we've had a question from Ahmed. I think I will put it to you, David. If I understand the question correctly, Ahmed is pointing out that we have said in this conversation that working from home is seeing people stretching the working day 12, 14 hours. But we've also had comments about 50% less productivity. So how does one point square with the other?
Well, I mean, you can be a busy fool, can't you? And the reality is I'm super efficient. I sit in my office and I do my work for a certain period of time, and I stop at midday and I stop at 5:30. So I have a fixed time I have to fix all my work, get my work into. So you get some people who are super organized and they can do it themselves, but others, and I think Ian was talking about this earlier on. Some people need an office environment for structure and for the rhythms of how you're meant to work. And if you're shoved into your home environment, and some people don't have the luxury of having an office, they have to, a 1-bedroom apartment, and it becomes almost you're doing tasks that aren't really fulfilling. So that's why I think some people who are very bad time managers or people that procrastinate just stretch their days out because they actually don't get their work done.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we have a question from Mehak. I'll put this to you, Ian. Are companies in the region doing enough when it comes to mental health and well-being, especially post-pandemic?
It's a question that at this point I can't really give a full picture of. But one thing that I will say that is very, very important, and we were talking about a new skill set for managers. Yeah. So one of those skills, and as we get into more and more remote working, will be being able to recognize and understand what mental health, well-being and illness means, and recognizing the signs of mental health illness amongst your employees and knowing what steps to take. Now, I'd like to say that, we're well along the road, but I don't think we are. It's still in its infancy now. And the problem will grow, I think, as hybrid working, as working from home grows. And so it's something that managers will need to give priority to, an understanding of what is mental health illness and how do you support someone and how do you help them?
Okay, thank you. Jerome.
Yeah, just, a couple of points there. The first one I want to highlight is the fact that mental health is a very complex topic for one reason. It's difficult for anyone to speak about it. So I think, it's easy for anyone to speak about any physical disease. When it comes to mental health, there is a kind of resistance from many people to talk about it. So I think to answer the question on whether employers are doing enough or not, it's difficult because I think employers have more and more understood the needs to provide solution to their employees. At the same time, when you look at it from the lenses of employees, today, 1 out of 3 are saying they don't get the right level of support. So it's still half glass half full, half empty, and it depends on which way you look at it.
Okay, thank you. Now, Jerome, I have a question here, which I'm going to put to you. It's a comment with a question at the end. So the questioner says, I think one other kind of mental health issue that we face in this region is people being away from their immediate family, particularly when such a high percentage of the workforce in the Middle East is made up from expats. So in your opinion, should employers be doing more on covering costs for tests, etc., when people are traveling home, particularly for those on low incomes? Is that something that you are seeing, Jerome, and do you think that's important?
It's not really what we saw, except in some very specific situations. Globally, worldwide, the cover was mostly covered whenever it's under medical condition and medical needs, not for sake of personal travel. Sometimes the government has picked up those costs in some geographies as well, in some European countries, for instance, but it was usually not covered by private sector because that covers personal needs. But what is really true, and I really agree with that kind of statement, is the fact that obviously in countries where people are expatriates, there was a kind of extra pressure when they were not able to go back to their home country and see their family. And it's very interesting when you look at the well-being index in the UAE, it's quite high today and even better than the pre-pandemic level. If you compare to some markets that are still closed and under some kind of restriction in terms of capacity to travel, those well-being index in those countries is still very low compared to the pre-pandemic level, mainly because of the constraints. So it does highlight that kind of need for sure.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to put this next question to both David and Ian. It's about recruitment methods. I'll just read it out. It's from Ram. So as David puts it, it is the introvert or extrovert staff we have. So I think what Ram is talking about is different personalities. Should recruitment methods have to change to reflect different personalities, but also different working models? I'll come to you first, David. How should we be changing the way? Should companies be changing the way they recruit?
I think they should, but not because of whether you're an introvert or extrovert, because those people have been around for the last 1,000 years. You know, that doesn't affect the job. That affects the type of person you want to put into the job. And traditional recruitment methods have always assessed that anyway. I think what we have to do now is assess for people that are comfortable and productive working from home as opposed to working from the office. So I think some of the questions employers ask now is, you know, how do you structure your day? What do you do? You know, what's your living routine? Do you have, you know, are you by yourself in a one-bedroom apartment, or are you in a villa with 400 children? There are different ways of approaching the questions, I think. In terms of introverts and extroverts, we have to be slightly careful that employers aren't responsible for everything to do with the employee. You know, they are hired by the employer to do a job. If there are certain traits or certain characteristics that come out of that mean they need to be looked after by the employer, brilliant. But you've got to remember, we're not a nanny state, and we should never be, because it's a free market. So the best people are attracted to the best jobs, and that will always be the case in a free market.
Okay, and Ian, if I can put the same point to you. So you're dealing with, from your earlier comments, people looking to get jobs in the region. How have recruitment processes changed since the 70s and 80s that you talked about?
Oh,
and
goodness,
do they need to, maybe don't go into absolute detail on that, but and do they need to change further in response to the pandemic?
So I think the first thing we need to make clear, and I'm sure David will agree with me with this, 95% of the employers in the GCC want candidates that are already in the GCC or have GCC experience. I think that's the first point right away. You know, we get the same old story. You know, we need to have somebody with GCC experience. How do you get that experience? You've got to start somewhere. You know, so we have that conundrum. But having said that, to go back to what we were talking about, introverts and extroverts, there may be a personality type that is typical for that kind of job. And there are very sophisticated psychometric tools now which are available to help employers to see that. So if anything, if you're talking about how has recruitment changed since the sort of 70s, the 80s, when I first started, it's much, much more sophisticated now. There are much, much better tools available to help you judge. And nowadays, it's not a case of people get hired because the hirer likes them best. People get hired because they have the most appropriate skills for the job.
Okay, thank you. Now we're getting into the final few minutes. We have a question here from Prabal, who I think submitted a question earlier as well. He makes the point, given the increased business uncertainty during the pandemic, don't you feel that productivity of a typical employee actually increased, you know, with many virtual meetings rather than a few in-person meetings, but the success rate with customers decreased because of their slashing budgets in their spending? So yes, this is Prabal's comments. Yes, things will change post-pandemic, but do you agree that it's actually about reduced budgets, not about employer productivity? So if I come to you, Jerome, first, is this actually a red herring talking about productivity? We're going to see changes because of costs.
So at least, I mean, if I look at our own situation, obviously everybody was working from home during the pandemic situation, and we saw an increased productivity, not a decreased productivity during the pandemic period. So we see definitely, a good uptake. What it did require, as mentioned by my two other colleagues and panelists, is really about the needs to manage differently our team members during this period and staying very close to them during this period. And for me, it was absolutely critical in view of the fact that we shouldn't forget that at that time, there was a lot of layoff plan, difficult situation. People were worried about losing their jobs. So being very close to the team members, reinforcing the commitment the engagement level was for me mission critical. And I think for me, that was a key driver of the efficiency and productivity.
Okay, now we're into the final few moments. I'm going to go around each of you for sort of top 3 takeaways from, we've had a broad discussion about the future of work, about changing expectations from employees, changing expectations and requirements from employers. If you could, I'll start with you, David, then I'll come to Ian, then I'll finish with you, Jerome. What would be your sort of top 3 strategic takeaways that can be for either employer or employee, or just generally in this future of work conversation?
I think mine is simple. The hybrid working model is here to stay. So forget about getting everyone back into the office is not going to happen. I think the employee welfare side will play a really big part in becoming an employer of choice. But I also think employers need to look at the different types of people they now need to hire that will highly likely be not the ones they've currently got.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David. Now, Ian, if I can ask you the same point from today's conversation about the future of work, what would be your sort of 3 strategic insights or recommendations?
Well, I think that organizations of the future will be shaped by, and they have to be successful. The key points will be making the workforce more flexible, mapping the talent to value, prioritizing strategic workforce planning and performance management, and most importantly, reskilling your employees.
Fantastic. And just on that last point, is that through training or through hiring new people?
I think it'll be a combination of both. I would like to say 50-50, but I think probably it's going to be 25% new hiring and 75% training in the immediate future. In the longer term, that may change. Okay.
Thank you, Ian. Now, Jerome, you are our host for today's discussion, so I'm going to finish with you, but the same question. If we're looking at the future of work, what after today's discussion, what do you think are your 3 top takeaways that people should think about in strategic terms?
I think for me, definitely the new way of working, meaning hybrid models. How do we manage that in the best way in order to optimize efficiency is critical. And actually, we didn't discuss it today, but when you think about hybrid and the way you manage it, both from an employer's efficiency perspective, being able to deliver innovative solution, and from an employee perspective, looking for flexible way of working, it's not that easy. It's probably much more complicated than any simple solution that was existing before, whether working fully from home or fully from the office. So I think hybrid is definitely, for me, a key takeaway. The second one I would like to highlight as well is, I think there was definitely a shift to technology, and we all realized the importance of technology during the pandemic, and it accelerated the pace of change and transformation for all companies. Now, that being said, for me, it drives 2 main consequences. One, it means we need to attract even more talented people to exercise and deliver that kind of transformation. And second one, obviously, that would probably enable us to automate the simple activities. At the same time, what it means, the remaining activities will become even more complicated than before. So it does require a very strong capacity to attract talent and to retain talent. And that leads to my third point is mostly around the fact that more and more, I think we need all to acknowledge the fact that whether it's a candidate or an existing employee, look at the employer as a global solution and provider of a job. So it includes not only the job to perform, but also the compensation, but also the full environment. How do we take care of the employees at the same time? I think that's really critical. So for me, definitely, employers needs to have a global approach with their team members to make sure they drive a very high level of engagement. Those would be my 3 takeaways. And I would really like to thank, you for, organizing this very interesting panel, but also David and Ian for sharing very interesting insights. So I've learned a lot today, and really interesting. So thanks for providing all those insights.
Well, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. We have run out of time now, so I'm going to have to bring the session to a close. just in response to the final question I received, yes, we will share the link so you can watch this discussion in a recorded form afterwards. We will share the link with everybody. Thank you to all of you for joining us today, for submitting your questions. We've had so many questions. It's been fantastic. But most important of all, thank you to David, Ian and Jerome for their time and their insights. We're all very busy people, and it's great of you to take this time to sort of share your expertise. So thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. And I look forward to seeing everybody at some point soon. Take care.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.